On today's show, I'm joined by Wes Morton of Peachtree Hoops to talk about the certain paths that the Hawks can go down in the next several weeks and months when it comes to the backcourt in particular, but also philosophically from an overall perspective about the team, because it's a big summer ahead for Atlanta. We'll get into all that and more right now.
You are Locked On Hawks, your daily Atlanta Hawks podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network. Your team every day.
Hello, friends. Welcome to episode 1721 of the Locked On Hawks podcast. I am your host, Brad Rowland, coming to you deep into the night here in May, and I'm joined on this podcast by my friend Wes Morton of Peachtree Hoops, and you can find him at BlogHawk on Twitter. Also, I want to encourage you at the top of the podcast, make sure you're first listening each and every day. Please subscribe to this podcast anywhere you might find your podcasts. That includes Spotify, that includes Apple, that includes YouTube, et cetera, et cetera. And also, today's podcast is brought to you by the folks at Game Time. Download the Game Time app, create an account, and use promo code LOCKEDONNBA for $20 off your first purchase. Terms apply. And with all that said, we'll dive in right now to Wes Morton and a whole lot of things when it comes to the path the Hawks can go down. And here we go with Wes. I am joined today by my friend Wes Morton of Peachtree Hoops. Wes, how are you?
Hey, I'm doing good. Doing all right. How are you doing?
I'm all right. It's a big summer for the Hawks. As soon as I read something that you wrote, I know I was going to ask you to come on the podcast to talk about it. Not just that, we can get into other things too, but I thought you did a really good job with this, and it's a good sort of framework for a show. And I've sort of joked with listeners already that I'm trying not to do 100% draft content between now and the draft. I'm sure you have that temptation as well at Peachtree Hoops. Are you getting comments about why you aren't doing more draft? Because I'm sure it's happening to you already.
Yeah, I mean, this is kind of weird because in most off seasons I would get kind of comments about where's the draft content, etc. This year I haven't seen it just because it seems like all the readers, all my Twitter mentions are basically all in on one guy, Alex Sarr at number one.
Yeah,
no need to consider anyone else. Pick the guy. Like, who cares? Don't even look at anybody else in the field. So that's probably
I saw
the
poll. I saw the poll that you tweeted out of the Peachtree readers. It was very, very high percentage draft Alex Sarr, and we're not going to do a ton of draft talk on this podcast. I'm not going to make Wes turn his draft hat on for this show, but there'll be plenty of that, I promise you. And obviously we can agree that what we're about to get into with all the different paths the Hawks have, they're now influenced by that pick. I mean, it was never as clear, and I know you wrote this too, as these four paths being super delineated, like very clear paths, but also having the number one overall pick really adds a wrinkle to all of them, or at least most of them. It's pretty interesting.
Right. Yeah. My overarching kind of theme was, this can be a real pivot point. I think the franchise was always going to come to a pivot point this offseason regardless, but with the pick, it's even more of a pivot point as far as, where can you go from here? It kind of gives you an excuse to do a lot of certain things, depending on what the direction the franchise is.
Yeah, it definitely helps to have. I mean, that's not a breaking news thing, but the possibilities that are open by the number one pick are very clear. But in case you don't know what I'm saying about Wes's piece, I framed it before I brought you, and I'll say it again now. Basically, what you laid out at peachtree.com, people should definitely read the piece beyond just listening to us. But these four kind of pathway choices the Hawks can make this summer with regard to the big decision, especially with the backcourt. And beyond the number one pick, even before that, the sort of national and local story is, what are they going to do with the guard spots? They're the two best players, two highest paid players, but everyone kind of agrees they don't work. And that's one of those, well, I shouldn't say everyone. Most people agree that they don't work. It's never everyone. I want to try to avoid that. But just broadly, I'll lay out what they are. You can correct me if you want to. And these are not in any order. Basically, it's building around Trae and moving on from Dejounte as one of the paths. You have building around Dejounte and moving on from Trae as one of the paths. You have the more nuclear option of trading both of them.
Yeah.
Which becomes really interesting, which we'll talk about in a second too. And then you have the one that almost no one is considering even, which is just keep them both and try it again for a third season or beyond if it works. Does that sound like generally what you wrote? I don't want to give it all away, but it is what it is.
Yeah, that's essentially it. I mean, like I said, I think obviously the big decision is what do you do with the backcourt, and that kind of informs where you go from here, like including the number one pick. Maybe if you're thinking about building around one guy versus the other, it may influence your pick, what you do with the number one pick. So whether you take a certain guy versus another certain guy, or maybe you try to trade it for more immediate help. So, but yeah, that's the general gist of it. And maybe if you don't know, so it's up on Peachtree Hoops. We'll plug it at the end. But yeah, the last option I think is probably an option that isn't considered very much. Like as you say, like it's almost kind of like you feel like you have to trade at least one of them. But the point I wanted to lay out was, it might be kind of silly, but Trae Young's under contract for another 2 years. He's got an early termination option after the third year. Dejounte is obviously his extension kicks in this year. You got him for 4 years. Certainly, even if there's discontentment in the locker room or other things going on, you may see that there's evidence that it's not working. You know, you don't have to move on from them. Like there's nothing really stopping you. It may make for some awkward kind of bedfellows, and it may kind of prod you towards, maybe that number one pick is okay. Why are we going to pick a rookie who's going to take a couple of years to really contribute at a high level? You would probably look towards moving that pick maybe for some more immediate help. But yeah, that's kind of the one I sort of wanted to throw out there very clearly. I think it would be kind of silly to do that. I think
It
the
is a
other
path.
three
No,
paths,
it's a path though. I mean,
it's a choice,
and
right?
and I know you wrote that like you weren't advocating any of these. It was more of a layout. Here's all the data, all that stuff. And I've said before on the show, like I think that it is possible that they might go into next year with Trae and Dejounte. It is possible. I've never said they're definitely trading one. I
Yeah,
do think that most of the league believes that they're going to move on from one of them, because I think you laid the numbers out in the article very well, and people kind of know this. I think they were plugged in, but it wasn't just this last season was the more pronounced version, where the two-man lineups with Trae and Dejounte were just like the worst quote unquote star pairing in the league by the numbers this year, as far as the team output was Trae and Dejounte, by a decent margin even. And the 2-year data is a little bit better, but no matter how you spin it, no one could really argue, at least that I would believe, could argue that it's worked so far. You might be able to try to argue that it could work in the
right.
future with a different, maybe if you're just dead set in that front office, if you're Quinn, you think you can just fix it and we want to keep these guys and we'll change other stuff. I don't think that's the best option, but I at least would understand it if you just decide that, for whatever reason, we haven't figured something out yet. Now we figured it out. I have a hard time selling it personally, but the way that you did is the right way. Like, you have these guys under contract. They are your two best players. I mean, there's a world in which Jalen becomes one of those top two players as soon as the season, I would say. Maybe number one pick becomes in your top two players in a couple years. But right now, your top two players are Trae and Dejounte. So it's like, I get what people, every once in a while, a fan will ask me, and they're being genuine, like, why would we trade one of these guys? They're our best players. And it's like, well, it's a reasonable point. You know what I mean? I think there's more nuance than that. And I think the real wrinkle that you mentioned briefly just a second ago is that if you wanted to really go in for now, it might push you towards trading the number one pick. And that is very aggressive because of what they haven't been in recent days. So I know you weren't arguing for them to do that, but like, if you just, I think people don't always think about it this way, but if you just think about the Hawks as this team that, yeah, they got a little bit unlucky this year, right? But even if you think they're a 500 team versus where they finished this year, which is probably more reasonable, I think, the last couple of years, that's a 500 team. You don't generally take a 500 team and trade the number one overall pick for a ready-made win-now player and expect to win the championship. Like, I feel like if you're trading the number one overall pick, you kind of be ready to like really, really, really contend right now. And that
Right.
feels like it's kind of a long way away.
Yeah, no, I definitely agree with that. I mean, I think it's just a matter of kind of the undertones of, well, there's some obvious, like, I think everybody recognizes, there's disappointment. The players said so. Like, there's obviously disappointment in terms of where they came in at and where they think they would be, and just the idea that, okay, we're trying to fit these pieces around, Trae and Dejounte. Maybe they just need tweaking. It seems as though there would be some push within the organization to at least consider, okay, we may need more immediate help than, okay, we've got this kind of flammable situation that could blow up. I talk about, the clock is ticking to a certain degree. We see interviews, Trae's putting maybe a little bit of pressure on the organization, talking about how he wants to win, but he has a little but that, or he wants to be here in Atlanta, but
Yeah.
he also wants to win. So those sort of things prod you towards you may consider the kind of nuclear option of seeing what you can get for the number one pick. I even linked some of Landry Fields' quotes right after winning the number one pick. He was pushing back on like, we've decided what we're going to do with it. It's a great opportunity. We're evaluating our options. So that's really all it is. I think we're both in agreement to know that like that's not going to be a real difference maker based on where the Hawks are now, where they are going forward in terms of the money they've got tied up in the players. Like you said, they're probably a little bit closer to the team they were last year, which is seventh or eighth in the East without any changes. Maybe they can push towards top six, but it's just hard to find enough difference makers to really vault. To really find a way to take Trae and Dejounte for the results they've put out over 2 seasons and find a solution that actually gets them to really contending in the East, getting to seeing themselves as a maybe a top 4, top 5, top 6 team in the East.
Today's show is brought to you by Game Time, and Game Time is an authorized ticket marketplace in the NBA, and that makes getting playoff tickets even easier and faster for you than it was previously. Prices on the Game Time app actually go down. It's closer to get the tip off, and they have killer last minute deals. They have all-in prices. They've used from receipts, and also the lowest possible price guarantee, and that makes Game Time a fantastic option. It makes things easy for you across the board. I've been using the Game Time app for a long, long time. It's come in handy for me for concert stuff, as well as Braves tickets, Falcons tickets, United tickets, etc. And they actually had their prices go down the closest you get to. It really makes it very easy to buy tickets there for sports, concerts, comedy, theater, and much more. They have flash deals. Actually, let Game Time choose the seats for you. If you are actually able to choose a section, they actually have a lower price as a result of that. And they have an awesome feature where you actually toggle to show the total up front. No surprise fees when you get to the checkout with the Game Time app. You get a panoramic view as well from the view from your seats in the app before you buy them, and you are getting the lowest possible price with the folks at Game Time. Take all of the guesswork out of buying tickets right now with the Game Time app. You can download the app right now, create an account, use promo code LOCKEDONNBA for $20 off your first purchase. Terms apply. Again, create an account, and we need that promo code LOCKEDONNBA for $20 off your first purchase. Download the Game Time app today. Last minute tickets, lowest price, guaranteed.
I didn't even, I think one other thing I mentioned in the piece is I really don't know how likely any of these things are. And we can kind of talk about the other paths as well,
Yeah.
but I think the big hinge is the big kind of pivot is, well, like we need to really understand where all the camps stand in this, where ownership, front office, but really, there's kind of whispers of, okay, does Trae and his camp want to be in Atlanta? Does Dejounte and his camp want to be in Atlanta? So that's obviously not something I know. It's not something maybe they themselves, Trae Young, Dejounte Murray, haven't decided themselves what they want. But that's going to inform, which of the other three paths they go down from here. Like that final path would just be if Trae and Dejounte are both bought in to making this thing work, staying in Atlanta long term, making it work, then that's a possibility. But my guess is, in all likelihood, that doesn't actually happen.
Yeah, and I still think even if they were bought it, even if you were to ignore any off-court influence at all and just looked at the raw basketball with your eyes and also the data to say, is this your best pairing you could probably have? The answer is still no for me. But you're right to point out that there are always other influences involved. And, anytime I say that, some people push back like, this is their job. It's not about anything like that. It's not a negative on anybody. It's just that personalities matter when it comes to this stuff. From the team side too, Tony Ressler might get involved. He's the owner. He's a hands-on owner. He might get involved. You have this young front office. You have a powerful head coach that you brought in for a lot of money. And then you throw in players and agents and all the way it all works. And like inevitably you have some of the stuff kind of mattering. And I got into it last year. I know you heard this too. The Trae stuff is kind of new. Like you said, he's putting some pressure on, it feels like. But we've never heard, at least I've never heard that Trae wants out. I think that could happen, but I've not heard that to this point. It was kind of this fine line with Dejounte, I guess 4 months ago now, we're talking in late May, about like, I heard repeatedly he was extremely open to being traded. That isn't the same thing as demanding to be traded, but being open to be traded, being I don't know if I want to say happy, but certainly not pushing back at all for being traded. From what I heard from that side of things back then, does that mean he wasn't bought in, or does that mean it just was the heat of the season and he was kind of fed up or whatever? They did say all the right things publicly. Trae and Dejounte had that podcast appearance where I know Bleacher Report resurfaced it like 6 weeks later and act like it was brand new, but it wasn't. It happened in April. But that doesn't always paint the most accurate picture either. So all that said, we touched on it's not the best pairing in the world. They kind of know that, but it also isn't easy to change. Like, trades are hard to make. I've seen every version of a Dejounte Murray trade in the last 5 months. Like, none of those are like home runs. You know what I mean? You might find a double of a trade for Dejounte Murray, but I have not seen a trade that's like fall on the floor, yes, please, with regard to Dejounte. Taking a step back though, and talking about let's just do the other nuclear option, which is the trade both option, right? Number one, I'd be pretty surprised. Just in the practical world, I'm not going to tell you it's impossible, but based on what I've heard for a long time now, I don't think this team is ready to take a rebuild step. They did that. I mean, you covered it. I covered it. It was a long process. Tony was gritting his teeth the whole time. Coming out of the rebuild, people have kind of forgotten this. People coming out of the rebuild, Tony, I think, tried to step on the gas a little bit too early. Like, I know we argued at the time, they probably weren't ready to win yet when they kind of put their chips in on that Gallo bogey summer. It was like, wait, are they going a little bit fast here? And that's what happens when guys, nobody likes to lose for multiple seasons. I say all that. That doesn't mean you have to lose when you rebuild, but if you traded Trae and Dejounte, yes, you get a lot for them. The combination of those two guys, you get a lot of stuff back. But I feel very confident in saying you wouldn't make your team better in the short term. It would be a long-term focused move. You'd get picks or whatever. I won't name names. We talked about this a little bit online this week. People have kind of somehow memory hold or forgotten that the Hawks owe 3 first-round picks to San Antonio, and they don't control their draft for 3 years. So one of the reasons that you might do the nuclear option, which again, I'm not recommending and think the Hawks probably wouldn't do, but if you were arguing on behalf of that, you got to keep in mind that one of the reasons to rebuild or get worse is to have your own picks get higher in the draft, and the Hawks don't have that option for 3 years.
Right.
So I say all that, Wes, like, there are teams that have rebuilt on the fly. I'm thinking about the Nets. Like, the Nets did this infamous mini rebuild where they traded all their picks away in the KG trade. It didn't go very well, and they had to rebuild because they were already bad, and they had no picks. And they figured out a way to be a pretty decent team. Like, they didn't become a great team, but they figured it out, But, like, no one would want to do that on purpose. Like, you don't choose that option on purpose. So you had to write that pathway. It's you did it well. But is that a realistic outcome? Like, do you see that as being in any way advisable given their current situation? And I guess we could just throw out the fact that, yes, they could trade to the Spurs. That could happen. That'd be the only way, right, I suppose, to make that. But beyond that, like, do you see any reason that they would even want to consider that, even in the fake world that we're talking about now?
Right. No, yeah. I don't know. Like I said, some of that's the desires, obviously the desires to contend. Nobody wants to go through a rebuild. I tried about that, like how painful it, like, there's kind of this snap judgment when things aren't going your way. Trade everyone, rebuild, and then you get half a season into the rebuild, and fans are frustrated that why are they so bad? It's like, weren't you calling for that a few months ago?
Well, and you know as well as I do, not to do the whole thing again, but like you've lived here a long time, like,
yeah,
people waited and waited and waited and waited and waited and waited for someone like Trae Young to come along, and to proactively make that step now, where even when they were good, a lot of the city, not all the city, but a lot of the city was like, wake me up when we get a star for 20 years. And like to take, and I know Trae's approval rating is lower than it's probably ever been locally at this moment in time. I'm not really sure why that is, but it is what it is. It is lower than it has been, but like, I can't say this is the way it should be, but that is a part of the calculus to just realize what your fan, like, it would not be popular if the Hawks were willingly being like, God, by the way, we're going to be a 20-win team again for a few years. Like, no one's going to like that.
Yeah. No. So, I mean, I'm glad you brought up the Nets. Like I said, if you're not, obviously the next 3 picks are owned by the Spurs, or at least, you'd have a pick swap. You've got control by the Spurs. You have a pick swap. You've got Sacramento's pick, which may convey next year or
may never at all.
may not. You may just get second rounders after that, but
Yeah.
yeah, I mean that's kind of the main impetus for rebuilding. You feel like, okay, well, we'll be in the lottery, we'll get picks, but the Nets obviously did that after without having their picks. They just had to get really creative. They had to find ways to steal low firsts and seconds and try to develop guys from within. What I kind of wanted to bring up was this is a coaching staff very focused on development. Now you can do development at every stage of the way. You don't have to be rebuilding to do development, of course.
Unless you're David Millen, of course, which
Well, yes, or you
said
can just
otherwise. But yes,
you can just not do it at all if you choose not to. But obviously, I mean, the progress a lot of the players have made, for example, in College Park this year, right, was really big for them. Ryan
Yep.
Schmidt did a great job down there with them, and we saw Kobe towards the end of the season really have an impact. And unfortunately, Moge, Seth Lundy had some injuries and things of that nature. But Veit Krejci, he's a big success story out of the Hawks. Like he was in College Park for a couple of months there. So this is obviously, like I said, a staff really focused on the development. So they kind of already have that kind of mindset now. Now, when it comes to, obviously, that doesn't mean you again trade both guys, but it is a possibility. Like I said, if both camps are somehow dead set on getting out of Atlanta, like you may
it
not
is
have
different.
a choice.
Yeah.
They may make a ruckus and in the media, and you may have some issues at that point. But
No, and I do think, think is not no, but I think that if they elected to trade one of the two, especially let's just say in this hypothetical they trade Trae, right? Which I'm not advocating for. I think Dejounte would be pretty happy being the number one guy in Atlanta playing for Quinn. Dejounte likes Quinn. He likes to have the ball. I think I would be surprised if Dejounte turned around and wanted out of Atlanta after they traded Trae. That would be a surprise to me. But you're right. Like there's the crazy scenario where like everything implodes and you have to do this stuff. But I'm glad you mentioned the coaching staff because you're right. They do prioritize development. Quinn is very focused on that and has a staff that's focused on that. But Quinn did not take the job in Atlanta to rebuild the team.
yeah,
Quinn wants to win basketball games. So the way you put it is perfect. Like they want to do both. They really invest in College Park. Quinn was a G League coach at one point. He values the G League. That's all right. But I can promise you, Quinn did not sign on to a 5-year deal in Atlanta thinking he'd be rebuilding in a year and a half. Like that was not part of the calculus. And I think if he has anything to do with it at all, he's not going to want to rebuild. It might be shades of Bud. Famously, when Bud replaces the lead decision maker in the front office, they brought in Travis. Bud did coach for a year, but it was an open secret that Bud wanted nothing to do with the rebuild. And everyone knew it, and he kind of acted accordingly. And like that next year, he was more forcefully getting his way out and ended up leaving. Because, and there's nothing wrong with that. It is what it's just the way, I think Quinn would make his voice heard that I don't really want to rebuild, guys. It's not what I signed up for. Does that mean it wouldn't happen? No, but he would probably raise his voice at some point. Today's show is brought to you by the folks at BetterHelp, and we carry around things that create stress, whether it's big or small in our lives. When we keep these bottled up, it actually starts to affect us negatively. Therapy is a safe space to get things off your chest and also figure out how to work through things, whatever that happens to be weighing you down at that point in time. Therapy is helpful for everybody. You actually learn positive coping skills and help you better actually set boundaries for yourself. Therapy also empowers you to be the best version of yourself. And it's not just for people that actually have major trauma in their lives. I know I have my own stresses that comes to work and future, etc. And we can also benefit from getting things off our chest with the folks at BetterHelp. If you're thinking about starting therapy, at any point, give BetterHelp a try. It's entirely online. It's designed to be flexible and convenient to your schedule. BetterHelp, it's even suited to your schedule all the way through, which is huge. You're trying to navigate a time crunch like I often am. All you have to do is fill out a brief questionnaire to get matched with a licensed therapist. You can switch therapists at any time for no additional charge. Get it off your chest right now with the folks at BetterHelp. And the place to go is betterhelp.com/LockedOnNBA. 10% off your first month with BetterHelp. The place to go, once again, is BetterHelp. That's better, H-E-L-P, betterhelp.com/LockedOnNBA. Okay, the other two are the more practical ones, I suppose, of the paths. Look, there's a big divide in the fan base. I know you've seen this online. I'm sure you have. I still think, in my experience, there are more people that would like to keep Trae than not. But there are people that would like to build around Dejounte and trade Trae. And so we'll look these two together on some level. It's not a mystery what I think. I think if I'm choosing one of the two to build with, I would choose Trae. I think Trae's the better player. He's younger. It's not that hard of a decision for me, quite honestly. That's just me. But there are obvious challenges to building with Trae Young. There always have been. I'm not ignoring those. It's hard to build with a guy as small as he is, as defensively challenged as he sometimes is, although he's gotten better there. So, and plus you have the reality that he might end up not wanting to be here too. But of the numbers that you threw out there, and we talked about them a lot, like they've been better with Trae in general and better with Trae and without Dejounte than the other way around, which isn't a shock. I think the offense, it's pretty clear to anyone, I think, that pays attention closely that the offense is way better with Trae than Dejounte. The argument for Dejounte that I've heard, at least the most reasonable one that I would say, is like Dejounte at the point you might be able to build a better defense. I would agree with you on that. The trouble with that is that you won't be good enough on offense for it to really matter. That would be my argument. I won't ask you to pick a side, Wes, but what do you make of those two, again, more practical, it seems like, options?
Yeah. I mean, that's kind of the big crux of it is, putting a team around Trae is, I think I wouldn't say fundamentally different than putting a team around Dejounte, but
It's
there
different.
are some,
Yeah.
different considerations you would have. And so, I mean, like I said, you brought up, I brought up, like the offense just functions better with Trae. Any season Trae's been healthy with a, somewhat talented, like a somewhat, you know, obviously contending team to a degree. He's put up top 10 offenses. He's kind of a top 10 machine. He's a, unique offensive weapon. Like, a lot's made of, maybe he's not the most efficient guy from the field, but in terms of him creating advantages, getting his teammates shots, playing with pace and doing all the things you kind of want, right? He's, for all his, maybe drawbacks and criticisms, like he's gone out there and produced and led a high level offense. Now,
Yeah.
There are drawbacks to it, and I paralleled the Hawks with, the Knicks just recently got eliminated, the Mavericks. There are drawbacks to having a guy who kind of demands the ball that much, or certainly really needs to operate with the ball to a large degree, have that kind of high usage. And I would argue that the Hawks haven't quite capitalized on that in the way they should, at least post 2021. In terms of how they built out the rest of the roster. So, that's kind of the consideration you would take from that. If you decided, okay, Trae's our guy, he's our franchise guy since 2018, this is a good time for a reset. We're going to move on for Dejounte. Certainly, the market's going to be whatever the market is for Dejounte. Like you can't always control that. Obviously, there were pretty heavy rumors. They were trying to move him at the like you said, try to, at least he was out there at the trade deadline.
And the market was not overwhelming for him. Now
Right.
they had real offers for him, and you can debate on whether they should have taken one or not, but they had real offers. And also, in-season trades are harder to make than out-of-season trades. You would think that it would be easier, and you might get a little bit more in the summer, given that there are more teams you can play with. The cap restrictions are a lot lesser, just for everybody that doesn't always dive into this stuff. It's just way easier to make these bigger trades in June or July than it is to make in February. That's just the reality of it. In February, basically, it felt like there was like a 2 or maybe 3 team market for Dejounte. That might be 5, 6, 7 teams in July. I don't know. It's too early to know. But that's part of why you're laying that out. It's like it's just easier.
Yeah. It would just be, so you would be able to kind of obviously, maybe, right. I think that the two things I brought up were, I mean, if you really wanted to, you could maybe dangle that number 1 pick. That doesn't mean you're trading the pick with Dejounte. It might be the number 1 goes out and you get a lower first round pick coming back somewhere. You may trade that draft pick equity with Dejounte to, get a little bit better return. But because that's going to go towards, trying to build your team around Trae. One, obviously, what one partner I brought up was the Pelicans. That's kind of maybe been the single most rumored sort of link between the Hawks and, there's a lot of, what can maybe putting Brandon Ingram or some sort of package sitting around Brandon Ingram maybe after the Hawks. Now he's 6'8". He's I think he didn't have the best year in New Orleans. I think he even said that at his media day, and the Pelicans seem like they're kind of moving on from him. But if you were to give him a Trae Young versus trying to use, say, a CJ McCollum at point, maybe he can kind of tweak his shot diet, take more threes, provide more length on the perimeter that the Hawks have had. Maybe you pair him with, say, DeAndre Hunter, and suddenly you've got 2 6'8" guys next to Trae. Maybe Hunter still has to defend a lot of the big assignments, but
I can
that's
already
still
hear the fan
more
base
length
really
than you've got.
excited about
Yeah,
that.
exactly. It's sort of like
no, it's challenging in like the way that I've seen people talk about it. Some is basically like, especially nationally, I feel like some people are framing it as like, okay, you trade whoever you get the better return for. And it's like, number one, you're going to get more for Trae. I'm fairly confident. I'm not saying it's 100%, but I'm pretty sure you get more for Trae. But like, that's not it's not that easy. Like that takes into account that basically says that these guys are the same player, and they're so obviously not. They play the same position. And just to say it again, I get pigeonholed in some places I think I'm super low on Dejounte. I'm really not. Dejounte's a really good player, and that's a good contract. It's a good contract, really good player.
Right.
It's just that I don't think that. I think, and look, if they had different pieces around him, it might be a little bit easier too. Like there's a world where you can build a really good team with Dejounte as your point guard. The trouble is that Atlanta doesn't have the pieces I think that you would want to do that with. I think Dejounte would be probably best suited as like next to a guy who is like a lead player as a wing. I won't name those guys to get people mad at me, but and Jalen maybe Jalen gets there. I'm not saying that he can't, but you know what I mean? Like it's just a little bit harder. I don't know. It's not as reductive as that. And I think that there's a lot of complication here. I don't think people are silly to act like they should, I think people that want to put Trae out there in trade are not crazy inherently, but you have to do it responsibly. And for me, the build around Dejounte is kind of a nuanced thing, because if your plan is to have Dejounte be your best player, you're not going anywhere.
Yeah.
Now, I'm not saying that that's what everybody means when I say that, but if that's what you actually mean, then your ceiling is like a 43-win team, in my opinion, if he's your best player. I'm not saying Trae's your best player is a perfect option either, because it's obviously not. Like you would not pick Trae out of the whole league, Wes. If I asked you pick how many guys you want as your best player, you wouldn't pick Trae in the top 5 or 10. You wouldn't. But I think for me that's kind of where it comes down for me. I think it's easier to see a team with Trae as the top 2 player on the team being a contender than it is with Dejounte. That's kind of where I land, especially given the rest of their roster constructions right now, which again, it's going to change, but unfortunately this number 1 pick doesn't really seem like it's going to be a superstar. I'm not saying it won't be, but it's not like you can look at this pick and be like, this is definitely going to be a superstar player. It might just be like a really, really good player, which is really helpful too. But
Yeah, and like I said, that's kind of when I wanted to sort of flesh out with it, the one path trading Trae versus trading Dejounte. Yeah, I mean I do agree with you. You would most likely get more on the open market for Trae, and I do agree with you. Right, Dejounte is just not that level of a player, like as an overall guy. But I do think there is a path towards at least staying afloat, and that's kind of what I mentioned. Like if you do go down that path, the idea is, okay, at the very least, maybe you're able to refigure some of the things. Like obviously they have the Hawks have operated in a manner which they want to avoid the tax. They haven't finished in the tax for under
they
this.
do? They want, interesting.
So it's a little, if you hadn't quite noticed. But yeah, so part of it is, well, you would want to be in a situation where you're kind of like we mentioned, some of those Brooklyn Nets teams, you want to at least float on water and be flexible, kind of have a cap situation that can be flexible for the next move down the line.
And because of what we said earlier about not having your own picks.
Yeah.
Again, I know there's this mythical scenario where they trade Trae specifically to San Antonio for their own picks, but that's like a 5-if thing. Like that's not likely to happen. I feel like people act like that's way more likely than it actually is. It's not impossible that it would happen, but that's not likely, let's just say.
Yeah.
And to your point, Dejounte is cheaper than Trae for 4 years. Like if you're right, if they keep their constraints, their self-imposed constraints on spending, let's just say in this hypothetical, even just to take this decision away for a second, let's just say Trae wants out. I'm not reporting that. I'm saying we find that out in a month, right? And the Hawks were like, you know what? Instead of having this disgruntled player that doesn't want to be here, we're gonna trade you, Trae. All right, we're gonna trade you, but we don't want to do the rebuild thing. So we're gonna keep DJ, and we're gonna be as good as we can be during this time where we owe these 3 picks. You get a bunch of stuff for Trae. There's still a world where you're a pretty good team.
Right. Yeah.
I don't know what you're gonna get from Trae, but it'll be something. Whether it's picks that you can either flip now or use later. You have to take some salary back. You still have Dejounte. You still have Jalen. Like you have Bogey. You have good players. So you wouldn't just suddenly be bad. That's the thing. I want to be very clear. Trading Trae in and of itself does not make you a terrible team. It makes you way worse, but it does not make you the Pistons.
Yeah.
Like it
doesn't. One thing you can create is depth, and that's something, arguably the Hawks haven't had since 2021. Like we've seen they may have 8 or 9 guys they trust, but a couple injuries hit, and now they're really struggling. So
you have 3 forwards on your roster for a full season.
Yeah, 3, 4, yeah, exactly. So I think that depth can maybe even that can kind of get you along during the regular season. Now, when it comes to a postseason with a shortened rotation, like I think we're both in agreement. You would rather have a Trae Young for in the postseasons than not. So you need that kind of ceiling raising sort of talent. So that's kind of the idea. Well, if again, I don't know what you would get back from Trae. One idea that was put out there by Steph No, a good
Sporting
writer.
News. Yep, Steph's a good
Sporting
guy.
News. Obviously the Lakers are obviously a popular destination for star players. They have honestly like almost exactly the salary they would have to match with Trae. You could get some decent players like Austin Reeves and Rui Hachimura. So the idea of trading Trae is you're not going to get a guy as good as Trae coming back most likely. Like I just don't really see a scenario. I don't really see a team has a player available like that, and that would be like a 1-to-1 swap. Like you're probably going to get that broken up into a few different players and a picks package. So
I would almost guarantee. I mean, I would almost
Right.
guarantee. Even with Dejounte, it's hard to get a 1-for-1.
Yeah,
like
that's true.
That's why Ingram is such a popular name in a lot of ways, because that actually is the rare. Like it kind of makes sense for both teams. 1-for-1 swap with Trae. Like it would. I don't want to say 100% because I don't do that. 98% confident that it would be pieces. You have to match salary, but it's probably with multiple players, picks. It would not be. And the Lakers are a great example. Now that package is not terribly exciting.
No, not at all.
Because it's just picks. Like it's picks and like filler salary, not awful salary, but filler salary. There isn't like a good. That's a harder sell, I think, also to your fan base. If you're Tony or Landry or whoever, is like, hey, we want. There's these 3 Lakers picks and Rui Hachimura. It's like that's what we're getting back. You want to maybe get someone who's a little bit more sexy just to sell it. But I understand that's not. Maybe you're very reasonable to point that out as like an offer that's going to be on the table if Trae's available.
Yeah. And I think this kind of speaks to no matter what they do on some level, like there's probably going to be a good amount of pushback, like regardless of whether they trade Trae or Dejounte. Like
there's not a move that is 100% popular in Atlanta.
Yeah, exactly. Right. Oh yeah, I just don't really see a move out there that's going to be universally like applauded, and any move that involves Dejounte is going to get compared to the original move from San Antonio. Like so,
and spoiler alert, they're not going to get that. They're not going to get it all back.
Yeah, they're going to have to essentially take an L on that, and they have to kind of come to that realization. I don't remember. I was listening to either your podcast or Kevin's, but I think Glenn Willis brought up a point where it's they have to get beyond the fear of losing a trade. Like they may lose it in the short run, but as long as they have more of a long-term vision for what happens beyond the line, like they may, they may get some bad media, pushback against any move they make, whether it involves Trae or Dejounte.
Yep.
Like it's probably gonna, Kevin Pelton's gonna release his grades. It's probably gonna go down as, not a good grade. But if they have a vision that they're willing to stick for and go towards, like that's kind of all you can really have.
Please have a plan. I've said that on recent shows with Glenn, with Tyler. You just said it without even me asking you to. We would all just like to know what the plan is. It would be great to know what the plan is, wouldn't it? Just for analysis purposes. Not even like for fans want to know too, but like for people that cover the team, it's like I'd love to know what they're trying, what they're even trying to do. Be great.
Right. And I think they are. I mean, one thing I will point out is they've brought some guys on into the front office within the last 18 months or 24 months or so. But essentially since the Dejounte trade, like they've got a lot of they've got guys from other organizations, from the Warriors, from the Cavs. So and I think everything that was mentioned at Landry's conference after the draft lottery was, hey, this is a collaborative effort. We're gonna talk. We're doing our due diligence. We saw Landry, Kyle, and Quinn in France scouting, Zachary Rissache, and I do think they obviously know the weight of what's going to happen, and so that's kind of why this kind of inflection point is presenting itself. Like they know that they're gonna have to make some big moves now, and they've got their own kind of restraints that they've imposed upon themselves, as we mentioned, and um, I mean, the clock really is ticking. Like as far as pressure coming from the fans and the players, like there's obviously been a lot of disappointment to not advance past the first round after 2021, right? I think you're starting to see that kind of resentment grow in the fan base, and so
For sure.
they know where they're at, and then I think they've have a consideration for, okay, what's out there in the draft class, what's out there in the free agent market. They were pretty much maybe the single most busy team towards the trade deadline, and in terms of rumors flying back and forth. So I don't think we've kind of joked and criticized them for their kind of lack of ambition, lack of moves since the
Yeah.
Dejounte trade. And really, their only move has been what I would call like a reactive move, if not a proactive move, in terms of the John Collins trade to get nothing back for it. And so,
Yeah. John and Sadiq are their only moves of any real.
yeah,
I mean, of like starter level consequence in the last
right,
2 years.
yeah, but like they're gonna have to make, obviously either of Dejounte or Trey would supersede that to a
Oh
degree.
yeah.
So and yeah, so I do think that's a consideration. I do think Quinn isn't very heavily involved, as you say. Like we really don't believe Quinn wants to rebuild. So
And he always, just for the record, he always pushes back on the notion that he has front office power. He was asked on the record several times. I've heard that offline too. Like he doesn't want anybody thinking he has front office power, but he has a voice. Like
right.
he's not the GM, but I think he has more voice than most coaches do, if I had to say. So
Yeah. So that'll be big. And a guy like Alex Sarr, for example, should they take him 1-1, that's probably going to fundamentally change how they want to line up, like defensively and offensively to a degree, or really anybody else they take with that number one pick. I think, obviously we've discussed this draft class. Um, it's obviously low on star power, but you can get some. You should be able to get maybe like a future starter at number one overall. That's someone that's a key piece.
yep.
And so if they're really considering just maybe building out their defense a little bit more, um there's the consideration that, hey, a Trae Young would bring along an Alex Sarr a lot in terms of getting him to be more of a modern NBA big man, getting him to rim run and set screens, and that do they have the confidence that, say, Dejounte could aid in that development? For example, if they were to trade Trae instead of Dejounte, like they may say, that's not good for the direction we want to go in. So um, yeah, that's kind of the tough part. Um, as far as your franchise point guard it's not literally a quarterback like in the NFL. Like it's not that quite important, but in terms of running your offense and leading, they're generally the de facto leader if you don't have a better player, I suppose, at a different position. So it really is truly like the face of our franchise is what comes down to what we do at this deadline. So it's been Trey since 2018. I think you and I are in agreement that he's really matured into that role. You know,
Yep.
it may have taken a couple of years, but in terms of the answers he gives, how he deals with the media, how he responds on the basketball court, and picks up things and learns, like he has truly grown to be the face of the franchise. So there's that consideration beyond the basketball court as well. So do they want to part? He's kind of obviously got kind of a special bond with the city, and we mentioned, you know, it would not go down very well with the fan base for you to trade away a guy like Trae. So if you were to ask me which is more likely, you know, I've kind of said all along that I think the most likely path would be seeing what you can get for Dejounte. Maybe you take a loss on trading him away, but recentering the organization, the play around the court around Trae, and just staying where you're at, using your pick on probably Alex Sarr. But you know, wouldn't surprise me to see them pick someone else. But seems like he's obviously kind of the most consensus guy at this point.
Yeah, you heard it here first. Wes weighs in on the draft. No, I'm kidding. I won't keep you any longer, my friend. I appreciate you saying all this, laying all of this out. We did plug it, but I'll say again, people should read peachtreehoops.com every day, no matter what. But also this piece that Wes wrote that inspired this podcast. Anything else to plug, Wes, before you get out of here?
No, that's about it. Yeah, please read peachtreehoops.com. You can follow me on Twitter /X at Blockhawk. We'll be covering the Hawks. We'll be covering the Atlanta Dream as they move to the WNBA season. We'll be covering, the draft. We'll have some draft prospect breakdowns come out. Definitely all the guys who could go number one. We'll have a piece on them at some point between now and the draft. So, yeah, please look for that. And follow me on Twitter.
At Blockhawk, check out Wes's content across the board. Peachtree Hoops is great. I used to be there and still read and still interact in Slack and support the guys however I possibly can. So check them out. Thanks again for being here, Wes. I appreciate it, man. As for everybody else, please subscribe to this podcast. Tell a friend. We're on Apple. We're on Spotify. We're on YouTube. Ratings and reviews appreciated. Follow us on Twitter. Follow Wes on Twitter. And we'll see you all next time.